Hilchis Gzeilah V'Aveidah Perek Shmein Aser. Now, until now, we were learning a dinim. If you find a mitzvah, the question is, was the person that lost it miyayish or wasn't he miyayish? If he was miyayish, so then you could keep it. If he wasn't miyayish, so then you have to return it, and there's dinim. How do you return it? You have to make a hachraza and kama dinim, and how you return it. So in other words, the question is, we have to establish who the owner of this item is. First, we have to establish whether or not there's a chiyuv to find the owner, and then we have to establish who the owner is. Once we know who the owner is, and he wasn't miyayish, so you have to return it to the owner. That's pashut. Masha'inkan over here, there's a mitzvah of shtaris. Shtaris, you have a shtar that the malva wrote, the leiva wrote a shtar to the leiva. To say that is, if someone borrows money, so he writes a shtar and he gives that shtar to the lender. The borrower is the one that writes the shtar, and he gives the shtar to the lender. And the lender has a raya that the borrower borrowed the money. So now that we know who the two people are, we know who the lender is, and we know who the borrower is. But the question is, who did the shtar fall from? So there could be three possibilities. There could be a possibility that the borrower actually borrowed the money and he gave it to the lender, and it fell from the lender, so it really belongs to the lender. There could be another possibility that the borrower wrote the shtar in order to borrow, kosav lulves v'leilova. Knows the din is case in shtar l'leiva afal pisha in malva ime, so there could be a hechatimtza of kosav lulves v'leilova. That could be another possibility, which would mean that the shtar fell from the leiva. There could be a third possibility where the leiva actually borrowed from the malva, and he gave the shtar to the malva, but then eventually the leiva paid up the malva, and then the malva went ahead and gave it back to the leiva. So the question is, you find a shtar halva, you don't know, did it fall from the malva or did it fall from the leiva? That's the question. So we don't really know who lost it. That's question number one. Then there could be another situation where even they both agree who lost it, but they could both be agreeing in order to make a knunya on the lekuchas, as we'll learn b'hamshach. That's the hagdama to this din. Now there's just another din. Let's just learn a pashtazach, that the din is that if you have a shtar, you could be geva from lekuchas. Whereas a milval peh is not geva from lekuchas. If you borrow money with a milval peh, and then lepel, you go ahead, you had karka, and then you went ahead and sold the karka, so the malva could not go ahead to the lekuches if he only was a milval peh. If it was a milval peh, the malva could not go to lekuches. Masha'inkan, if it was a milva b'shtar, so the malva has a shtar saying that the loiva owes him money. So now, from the date of when the shtar was written, the malva could go ahead and if anybody bought karka from that date onwards, from that loiva, she could go and say, listen, the loiva owes me money, and memela, I have a lien on this karka, which he had after I lent him the money, or the time I lent him the money, or after I had lent him the money, and I could go ahead and go to the lekichus and take away the money. That's only if it's a milva b'shtar. If it's a milva balpeh, so then you're not given from the lekichus. That's this din. So now the question is, when the malva, you find a shtar. So now there's two diyunim over here. There's one diyun, who lost the shtar? Did the malva lose the shtar, and therefore he is entitled to go ahead and get money from the leiva, or did the leiva lose the shtar? And memela, it's not the malva, so he's not entitled. Now, l'chura, such an inyan, if the leiva agrees that the malva is the one that lost the shtar, so the leiva is not money to be mafsid alatzma. You know, he says, no, it's the malva shtar, and therefore the malva really has a right to go and won the shtar, give the shtar back to the malva. The problem is that Eina Chinami, the leiva is believed to be mafsid on himself, and to say that it's the malva shtar, but lepel, if the malva is going to be able to go and mon from the lekuchas of the leiva, so the shaila is, the leiva is being naman over here to give it back to the malva, but through that he's putting the lekuchas he'll be able to mon from the leiva. And maybe it's really, maybe it's a possibility that be'emes the leiva paid up the shtar. He already paid up the shtar, and the shtar fell from the leiva. And the mela, so they don't owe each other anything, and therefore the malva has really no right to mon from the lekuchas. But now that this shtar was found, so the leiva and the malva went together, and they said, listen, let's pretend that the malva, I still owe the money to the malva. And memela, the malva will be able to come to me, mon the money. And for me, he can't take anything because I don't have any money. So he's going to go to my lekuchas. And through that, he's going to take away from my lekuchas. My lekuchas are eventually going to come back to me, but I have no money. So memela, the malva will share some money with the leiva. So in other words, by the leiva being moida, that the shtar belongs to the malva, he's causing the lekuchas to be able to lose the shtar. to lose their karka, and that's something he's not neman. So therefore, if there's such a concern, so therefore, even if the leva is moida to the malva that the shtar belongs to him, so then you can't give it back to the malva. Is nachamol. You find the shtar, and there's a shaila who lost the shtar. Did the malva lose the shtar or the leva lose the shtar? So if they're both arguing, each one is telling they lost the shtar, and there's no reason to believe either one over the other, as we'll learn b'hamshach, so then obviously you can't give it back to either of them because you don't know who lost the shtar. Now, what happens if they're not arguing and the leva agrees that the malva lost the shtar? So it depends. If the malva, by giving the malva the shtar, nobody will have a loss because this shtar is not going to be able to mun from the kuches. Why will the shtar not be able to mun from the kuches? Because it says specifically in the shtar that the shtar, there's no achrayas, you can't mun from the kuches with the shtar, so then you give it back to the malva because the malva will only be able to mun from the leva, and the mela, that's not a problem, the leva is maida. Masha'inkin, if the malva will be able to mun from the lekuches, so then you can't give it back to the malva, because even though the leva is being maida, but could be that he's making a knunya on the lekuches, because right now it's a shtar mugdam. Right now the leva can't write such a shtar, because right now you'll call Adam, you're not allowed to sign a shtar which is predated. This shtar has an earlier date, which you can't write such a shtar today. So maybe really the shtar is parua, because why should you be choishish it's parua? The chura is becheshish on every shtar is parua, because since it fell, so there's a certain reyes in the shtar. So therefore, there's chashash that maybe it's parua, and the fact that the leva is being made, we don't believe his namonis against his namonis in order to put the lekuchis in a position where the malva will be able to take from the leva. That's this din. Then the Gzeilah, we're learning another din, that lepel every shtar chayv could mun from lekuchas, unless it says clearly that you can mun from lekuchas. In other words, you don't need that it should be this machlekes shaila in gemara, machlekes in gemara, whether achrayas toy seferu. Do we assume that a shtar that doesn't have achrayas is considered a mistake, and therefore we assume that there is achrayas? So therefore, you could always mun a malva, could always mun with a shtar from the lekuchas, or we say no, that if this doesn't say clearly achrayas, so then he can't mun from the lekuchas. So the Rambam paskins achrayas toy sefer, and therefore the malva could always mun from the lekuchas and still, unless it says specifically that he can't. And therefore, as a result of that, the din is that even if the leva is made, you don't give it back to the malva unless it's clearly that there's no achrayas in the shtar. This is the first two halachas. Perek Shmeina Aser halacha aleph. Hamoitzi shtar chev. A person finds a shtar chev. Is aval pishali pirush be'achrayas nechasim. Even though it doesn't say in the shtar that you could go ahead and mun from the lekuchas. And va'aval pisha achayev made. And even though there's no concern over here that the leva is agreeing that he didn't pay the debt yet, that it really belongs to the malva. And va'aval pisha mekuyim. It's a mekuyim dikashtar, because lemaisa is that a mekuyim dikashtar means that it wasn't kos of lulvis v'leilava. But the person that's mekayim the shtar is the malva, not the leva. So if the shtar is mekuyim, so we could understand that the malva already had possession of the shtar, and as a result of that, he went ahead and was mekayim the shtar. So we see in the shtar that the malva already had the shtar, and the leva agrees that he never paid the shtar, and the shtar really doesn't have achrayis nechasim in it. Nevertheless, harez aliyaser, you're now allowed to return the shtar to the leva, to the malva rather. Why? Because shema pari, maybe in reality the leva paid the shtar. And they're just making a trick. They want to take from lekuch shlekedin. So in other words, we're choishes since it was nafal. We're choishes maybe it's not a good shtar. We're choishes is not a good shtar. So and if it's not a good shtar, obviously the malva can go and mun from the lekuches. Elamai, the leva is agreeing that it is a good shtar. Good, the leva could agree that it's a good shtar against himself, but he can't do it against the lekuches. So therefore, and that's why he was meidalei. Lechura the shtar doesn't have achrayas. So on that the Rambam is shari yesh lo liter b'shtar sheli pirish be'achrayas, because even though the shtar doesn't have achrayas, but nevertheless the malva is going to be able to mon from the lekuches, because achrayas shelei nesparsha toy seifu, because the rule is that even though the achrayas doesn't say clearly in the shtar, it's considered a mistake. Ben b'shtari alva, say when we're dealing with a loan. So if someone borrows from someone else, so there's a din, then he writes a shtar and doesn't write in the shtar clearly that my nechosim should become meshubit. so that the nechas become a shubit, and therefore the malva could go ahead and mon from the lekuchas. Al derech if someone sells a piece of field, person sells a field, so he got money, and the question is, he could write in the shtar that in the event that field is taken away from the buyer, so that money that he got, he owes obviously to the buyer, and not only owes to the buyer, but there's achrayis, all other nechasim that he possesses is achroi to that sale. So if he writes that, so it's clearly he wrote that his possessions, his karka, it has a lien to that sale. So in other words, if that sale ends up being not a sale, so it's so the lekeach gave money to the mecher for no reason. It's like a loan, but it wasn't really a loan. It was like a forced loan. It was a mistaken loan. So now the mecher has to go ahead and reimburse the buyer with the money that he has. And if he doesn't have any money, he has to give away his fields. And if he doesn't give away his fields, so you could go to the buyers of this seller that sold fields after he sold it to the original buyer, which lost the field, and take it away from him. That's this din. It's like when you make a sale, so that money that you received, so it's considered that in the event that money, the person, the sale never went through, so he gave the money shleikadin, you could mum from his karka. Therefore, since that's the problem, in pirish b'shtar, if it says clearly in the shtar, shehu shalei b'achrayis, that it's walei achrayis, is imhoy achayev made is yachzer, v'imlav leyachzer shem apori. Is the nekud of din is pashta din, that if you find a shtar, so the first issue is that it fall from the leiva, that it fall from the malva. So now, obviously, if neither of them agree, if they both arguing, so we don't know, so you can't give it back to either of them. That's pashat l'chura. That's the pashtus advar. If they do agree, so if there's no concern except for the malva taking from the leva, so if the leva agrees that he owes the malva money, there's no problem. But if there's a concern that the malva is not going to take from the leva, the malva is going to take from the lekuchas of the leva, so memela we don't believe the leva that he never paid up, or choshed that maybe he did pay up, and therefore the malva is not really entitled to take from the lekuchas of the leva, and the only reason why the leva is agreeing that the shtar belongs to the malva is in order to make a knunya on the lekuchas that he sold to. That's din number one. Halacha beis. So basically, the yesod is that you give back the shtar. In other words, if the person that may be hurt is being made that it's not his, that it belongs to the other person, and there's no one else that could be hurt by this shtar, that you could be mafsid with the shtar, so then you give back the shtar. So therefore, l'mashal, if you have a shtar that says befedish that there's no achrayas, and the leva is made, so nobody could be hurt, so therefore you give it back to the malva. V'chein, in motzeh shtar shezmani beibayim. The shtar was written that day. In other words, it's not a shtar that was written a while back. It was a shtar that was written today. And v'hoye mekuyim, and it was also a mekuyim dik shtar. Now, a mekuyim dik shtar means that it was already yad ha-malva. In other words, when it's not a mekuyim dik shtar, we're not really sure. Did the leva ever give the shtar to the malva? Was it a kos of lulves v'lei lava, or no, he gave it to the malva? But if it's a mekuyim dik shtar, we know that it was already by the malva, because the malva is the one that's mekayim the shtar. And now v'achayev meda, so we know there was a shtar. The shtar was by the malva. The question is, did the malva get money and give it back to the leva? So, and v'achayev meda, and the chayev is meda, the leva is being meda, is yaza, so then you give it back. And the reason for it is bepashtus, because what's the chash? The malva definitely had the shtar. And now the question is, did the malva get paid? The leva is saying he didn't get paid. Elamai, maybe there's a chash, that there's a knunya. What's the knunya? Maybe there were lekuchas that bought that day, and they want to be mafsed those lekuchas. But they could really produce such a shtar themselves. They could produce such a shtar themselves today. In other words, bishlema, when you have a predated shtar, so you say that maybe it was Hamol written, and now you can't really produce such a shtar, and they want to have this shtar, make it a real shtar, in order to be mafsed the lekuchas. But this shtar that's dated today, that shtar they could make today. The malva and the leva could sit together and make such a shtar, and with Adam. So memela, so therefore, you don't say that over here there's a chash that they want to be mafsed the lekuchas. And also, it's not so clear how are you going to be mafsed the lekuchas. In other words, you have a shtar that's dated today, and the lekuchas bought it today. So the question is, are you going to really be mafsed the lekuchas? In other words, are you going to be able to mon from the lekuchas when they were dated today? Who says that the shtar was written before the Lekuchas bought it. Whereas if they're both dated today, so how are you going to have a braya that you borrowed the money today before the Lekuchas bought it? I'll call upon him. This din is, so if you have a shtar that was written, that's dated today, and it's also mekuyim, so then you give, and the leva is meida. Obviously, if the leva is meida, there's nothing to talk about. But if the leva is meida, so then you give it back to the malva. However, vim eini mekuyim, but if it's not a mekuyim dikashtar, so over there, there's a chash, over there, even if it's eini mekuyim, and the leva is meida, so here we say no, leya, so don't give it back to the malva. Why? Because Shema, Kosav Luv is Vadayin Leilov. Over here there's a chash that maybe really the leva never borrowed the money. He never really borrowed the money. So if he never really borrowed the money, so it was never really a chiyuv of a loan. There was never really a chiyuv of a loan. So really the malva has no real right to mon with this money. So what's the problem? The problem is that the malva will eventually mon with this loan from the lekuchas. And the fact that he'll take from the leva is not really a problem. The leva is the agreeing. He's agreeing to give it back to the malva. But there's a concern. You're giving a shtar to the malva, which maybe was never really a loan. There was never a loan. Eventually, maybe the leva is going to borrow the money, but he's going to borrow the money at a later date. And the malva is going to be able to take this money. The leva, let's say today is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So now today is the Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and the date on the shtar is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And the leva is saying, give it to the malva, because it's the malva shtar. I borrowed the money, and it's the malva shtar. I never paid him up. And lepel, it's not a shtar makuyim. So we're not really 100% sure that he actually borrowed from the malva. So what's the chash? The chash is maybe he never borrowed from the malva. And the malva right now doesn't have any money either. So lepel, he's giving it to the malva. And lepel, the malva will eventually lend this leva the money, and he's going to be able to mon from the lekuchas from today's date, and he really is not entitled to mon from the lekuchas from today's date, because lepel, there was never a loan. So therefore, there's always this chash that maybe the malva is getting the shtar without actually ever paying the money, and memela eventually, when he's going to mon the money, he's going to be money shalei kedin. Now, the emes is that every time you could have such a chash, because lepel, a leva could borrow money from a malva. Now, if the leva is willing to give a malva shtar and trust him without actually ever getting money, and lepel, the malva will be able to collect the money that he will eventually give the leva. He's going to lend the leva money. If the leva doesn't end up paying him, he's going to be able to pay from a shtar mugdam. So there's really always such a chash. A person goes ahead and writes a shtar. And lepel, the leva could give it to the malva, the shtar, even though the malva didn't give him any money. Now lepel, later on, when the malva gives the leva money, so the leva owes him the money, but he really only owes him money from the time that the malva gave him the money. Later on, if the leva doesn't end up paying, so the malva is going to be able to mon from the lekuchis, from the zman hashtar, which wasn't really true. And that's really the chash over here. We're saying that if the malva never really had the shtar, so maybe the malva is going to go ahead and mon shalei kedin, because lepel, he never lent him the money. And only when you know Kosav Luvis. But normally there's no reyes in the shtar. Normally a shtar, you know that the shtar is bepashtus. A leva is not going to go ahead and give a malva a shtar almanas that the malva will eventually borrow from now, it will be able to collect from now, and he'll only get the money later. It's too complicated. So a normal person is not going to give a shtar to a malva almanas that the malva will give him the money later and then eventually take it. Masha'inkan over here, the leva already wrote a shtar. He wrote a shtar. He wants to borrow the money. The leva wants to borrow the money. And he wrote the shtar to give it to the malva. Could be the leva lost the shtar. He lost the shtar. And lepel, the malva never gave him the money. So now, if he's going to admit that he really lost the shtar and he never borrowed the money, so maybe he's not going to be able to use the shtar. He's not going to be able to use the shtar. So now he's saying, no, that this shtar is a good shtar, and lepel, he already borrowed the money from the malva in order to save the money that he already spent. Normally, a person is not going to go ahead and write a shtar and give it to a malva without getting the money, almanas that the malva is going to give him the money later, and later on the malva is going to be able to take from the lekucha shlei kedin. That's too complicated and it's too risky for the leva. But over here, it's also risky for the leva. But the leva doesn't want to lose that money that he just spent on that shtar. He went ahead and paid money for the shtar, and lepel, the malva didn't have the money. So Lepel, he never took the money from the malva. He never borrowed from the malva. And Lepel now, he went ahead and lost that star. So now he's saying, give it to the malva, and Memela, the Vaila, he's going to eventually get the money from the malva, and the malva will be able to use the star, but the malva will be able to use the star for a star mugdam. So therefore you don't give it. I'll call upon him. That's the din. The din is that if you lose a star, is nochamal, you lose a star, and there's an issue of who do you give it to, the malva and the leva. So the leva is saying, give it to the malva. So if there's a chash that the malva is going to take from the lekucha shleikadin, so then you don't give it to the malva. What's pshat the lekucha shleikadin? So we're saying there's two ways of shaluka shleikucha shleikadin. One way is that it really was already paid up star. It was already paid up star, and it was only a knunya on the lekucha. It's really the emes was paid up. That's halacha aleph. That there's a chash. It's a paid up star. So if there's a chrayis nechosim, if there's a chrayis, either a chrayis toy safer. So every star that doesn't have a chrayis also has a chrayis. So you don't give it back to the malva unless it says clearly that there's no achrayis. That there's no achrayis. And then we have another situation where you do give it back to the malva. When you know the leva, it's a star that was written today, and also it was a star that we know for a fact was already by the malva. It was already by the malva. So the question is, there's no chash of kosav luvis v'lilova. There's only a chash of maybe he paid back, and since Lepel the leva is saying he didn't pay back, so we're not choishish, and Mela we say that you are able to give it back to the malva. Halacha gimel motza star b'chemes e b'kliyesuk yesbem. You find it in a leather pouch, or you find it in a kliyates. So the din is hareze yachzel mishanos and simon. The person that gives the simon, that's the one that's yachzel. So if the malva gives the simon, you're not going to be choishish that maybe the leva really gave the simonim to the malva, and the malva is psaknunya. So in the case where the leva is made that it belongs to the malva, so then we're choishish, maybe it's a knunya. But in the case where the malva gives a simon, so then when vice is not choishish that the malva, that this is a knunya. We don't have to go through the process of maybe it's a knunya. Now, matzah shleisha shtaris kruchim b'krach echad. You have three shtaris together in one roll. They're all rolled together. A menachem zal gav zeh v'aguden eged echad, or they're placed on top of each other and they're tied together, one tie. So mele, these three are one unit. So then is yazel mishanos and simon. That in itself would be a simon. That a person says that I have three stars together, that would be a simon. The minyan would be a simon, and therefore you give it to whoever gives the simon of whatever the simon is. Halacha dalet. Now hoya haloi ve'echod v'hamalvim shleisha. There's one borrower and three lenders. So l'chura, if it's one borrower and three lenders, l'chura b'pashtus, it fell from the borrower. It fell from the borrower. So in other words, l'chura we'd assume that the lender, in other words, the borrower gave the shtaris to each of the lenders, and then eventually he paid them up, and then they all returned it to the borrower, and now it's the borrower, so he paid it up. That would l'chura be the pashtus. But the ma'aseh is, while it's by the lender, there could be a metzias where a lender wants to go ahead and make sure that there's a confirmation on the shtar, that the shtar is of shtar mekuyim. So that he does that, he goes to Bezdin, and Lepel, there's a sefer of Bezdin, which writes these kiyum hashtaris, the kiyum hashtaris. So there's really a possibility that it should be three shtaris, which have three lenders, and they don't really belong to, and three lenders and the same borrower, but it didn't really fall from the borrower. If it didn't fall from the borrower, how did the three lenders end up together, the shtaris? All three lenders went ahead and gave it to the sefer in order to write the kiyum. And then it fell from the sefer. So there could be a hechatimtza where you have three shtaris together with three lenders and one borrower, and it didn't fall from the borrower, it fell from the sefer, which was really holding it for the lenders. So as I say, that's mamedvar mamurim. If the shtar wasn't yet a kiyum, in other words, you have a shtar without a kiyum, three stars without a kiyum, could be the three malvim gave it to a sefer in order to make a kiyum, and lepel, it fell from him before he actually made a kiyum. But if lepel, there is a kiyum on these three, so we assume that he doesn't keep it by himself after the three kiyumim. In other words, as soon as there's a kiyum on one, he gives it back to that malvin. In other words, he doesn't have a sefer, doesn't have three shtaris, which all the three of them have a kiyum. He would give it back each, as soon as there's a kiyum on one, he would make sure to give it back to the malva. So Memela, if they're mukuyamim, so then we could assume they didn't fall from the sefer. So who did they fall from? The fact that they're all three together, it must be that they fell from the leva. That's this din. Now, hoya leva echad v'malvim shleisha. You have three lenders and one borrower. is im mikuyam, if they're mikuyam, so therefore obviously they didn't fall from the sefer, they didn't fall from three malvim together, and the only possibility there should be together is because they were by the sefer. We say no, because since they're mikuyam, so they obviously didn't fall from the sefer, so therefore yahzul leva. So we assume that all three of them returned it to the leva, because the leva paid each three. However, vim lav, if they're not mikuyam, so then is yahzul mishanos and simon. We don't really know whose star is the star from the leva or the star from the mal. Who lost the star? Is it the leva or the malva? So therefore, yahzul mishanos and simon. Why? If there's three stars and one leva and three malvim, so how could it be that it didn't fall from the leva and it fell from the malvim? Because Shema HaMalvim nosnu shlari seim l'sefer l'kaimam. Maybe the malva gave the star to the sefer in order to make the kiyum, and lepel v'nafel miyad adayin. So memela, it's really a star of the malva. It just fell miyad adayin. Now that's talking about that the leva was one and the malva was three. Now hoya hamalva echad v'alev mishlesha. The malva has three borrowers and he's one lender. So then it is yachzil malva. Then it's pasha that you'll yachzil malva. How did the three get together? The fact that three together must have fallen from the malva. Now v'mhoyu shloshtam b'ksav yidei sefer echad. However, if all three of them were written by one sefer, same handwriting, so then again yachzil mishanas and simon. Why? Because shema shloshtan hilichu shtaryein l'sefer lichte v'nafel b'yad sefer. Over here it could be the same situation. The other way, before we were talking about that the malva gave it to the sefer or to Bezdin in order to get a kiyum. Over here we can have three people, want to borrow money from one person. There's one person is a lender, he lends money to people, and there's three people who want to borrow money from him. So all three of them go to a sefer in order for him to write them a shtar. So could be he wrote a shtar for all three of them, and lepel, none of them really borrowed. None of them never borrowed. So Memela, it's not necessarily that really it belongs to the malva. So if it's three different handwritings, so we're not going to say that they all went. This possibility that there was one sefer that wrote for all three leivim, that's only in a situation where it's one sefer writing all three of them. Mashayin, if it's different seferim, so obviously that scenario is not there. So the only possibility why the three were together is because the malva received this star from all three of them, and Memela it fell from him. So this din, that hoya malva echad v'alev mishlesha. So the din is we assume it's the malvas. That's only when it's not the same handwriting. Mashayin, if it's the same handwriting, so then there's a possibility that there was one sefer that wrote for all three levim. So then you have to wait for the simon because you're not really sure who's the one that lost this star. Halacha hey, matzah shtaris kruyim ushtar chayv b'neim. In other words, you have shtaris that all belong to one malva, and amongst those shtaris there are shtaris kruyim, and you have a shtar chayv b'neim which is not karua. So the pashtas, they all fell from the malva. The question is, since the other shtaris are shtaris kruyim, which indicate that those shtaris are no longer payable, because that's the kra shows that he ripped up the shtar, that it's no longer payable. There's one shtar that doesn't have a karua, so we say also leyav, so don't return it to the malva. Even though the indication is that it fell from the malva, they were all together, so obviously it fell from the malva, but you don't give it back to the malva, because there's a chash that since this shtar, which is not karua, was amongst all the shtaris karuyim, maybe it's also a pasul shtar. Now, but on the other hand, we don't have a raya that it's not the malvas. We don't give it back to the malva. We don't give it to the leva either. We don't give it back to the malva. Now, v'im yeshi moim shaver, if there's also a shaver amongst the shtar skruim on this person's shtar, in other words, it's sai shtar skruim. There's a shtar which is not karua among shtar skruim, and together with this shtar, there's also a shaver on the shtar, which is afilabli edem, even though the shtar wasn't signed, is yitin shtar hachev leva. So then you give the shtar to the leva, and those you say that for sure it belongs to the leva, and the leva doesn't have to pay the shtar. Before we say you don't give it to the malva, but on the other hand you don't give it to the leva. Mashenkin over here you actually give it to the leva. Yitin shtar hachev leva sheilu leheya parua. If it wouldn't have been parua leishliche ben shtaris kruyim. So first of all, there's an indication the fact that it's ben ashtaris akruyim. So that's a raya that it's parua, and also variyeshi makes safshu parua, and there's also safshu parua. So there's like two edus, two simonim that this shtar is shtar parua. So one simon is not enough. You don't give it to the malva, but on the other hand, you don't give it to the leva. Mashenkin, if you have both in yonim, sai that it's ben ashtaris akruyim, and sai that there's a shaver together with it, so then you don't give it. Then you give it to the leva. Halacha vav. Motza giti noshim. A person finds a get. The question is, did the woman get the get, and Memela she's Megureshes, and she can use this get to prove she's Megureshes, or maybe, the husband actually wrote the get, and he wanted to give the get, but he never actually gave the get. So then is Azay. Bisman Shabal made, if the Baal is made that he was Megarisher, is Yazul Isha, he gives it to the Isha, because Lepel he has the ability to be Megarisher now as well. Or he can use this get to be Megarisher. However, Ein Abal made, if the Baal is not made, Im Nosno Isha Simen Muvik, if she has a Simen Muvik, like we'll soon see what the Simen Muvik is, which shows that she saw this get and she knows what the get looks like, so which means she already received it, you don't give it to the Isha, you don't give it to the man. Now, Omer Abal Miyodi Nofel and Venosan Simonov, Vayisha Imeris Miyodi Nofel, Venosan Simonov, so they're both giving Simonim, so the din is Yinosan law. Because Lepel, he obviously knows the Simonim, he wrote the get. So the fact that he knows the Simon is not a right that he never gave the get. The fact that she knows the Simon is a right that she received the get. Aber Vahu, in order for her Simon to work, to be a raya that she actually received the get, is only Shahu Shatitan Simon Muvik. She has to give a Simon Muvik. In order for this Simon to work, it has to be a Simon Muvik. In order to be matter al Tzanesh Sish. We learned before that Benigayam Aveidah, there's dinim that even things that are not mamish Muvik, mamish. So that's also as a din, Legabi Aveidah, that it's considered a Simon, that she get Aveidah back. But She'inkin Legabi to be matter and Sish with a get, you have to have a Simon Muvik mamish. You get what's a Simon Muvik? In Sha'amra, Nekev Yesh, beside they explain this. It's not something that only because it was a Gil she could know such a simon. And such a simon would be enough to give her back the get and Memela enable her to get married with this get. Now, who Eimer Simoni Achut Shekosher Be'aget? V'hi Eimer Simoni Achut. There's the simon of how long the chut is Yinosan law. Who should tamer Simon Muvik? And there's a Simon Muvik. What is Simon Muvik? In Eirach Midas Achut. She says how long? You have a get and you have a string on bottom of the get, and that ties the get together. So how long that chut is? She just says a simon of the color of the chut. Ain't a Simon Muvik. Now who Eimer b'chemes hoyamunach? Let's say he says that this get was lying in a chemes, in a leather pouch. And she says it was in a leather pouch. So the din is Yinosan lei. She give it to him. She'ain's a simon movie because that's not a simon movie. In other words, the fact that she is saying that it was in a leather pouch is not a raya. Because Lepeil, the fact that she's saying it was in a leather pouch, she knows that her husband puts things in a leather pouch. So Memela, the fact that she's saying that it's in a leather pouch is not a simon movie. On the other end, the fact that he's saying it's in a leather pouch, so if it would be hers, the pashtus, it wouldn't be in a leather pouch. So Memela, the fact that he's saying it's in a leather pouch is a simon that it's stuck of his. And Memela, for him, it's a simon movik. In other words, we said before, when they both didn't give simonim, so then you don't give it to either. So l'chura over here, if neither of them made a simon movik, so l'chura, why do we give it to him? So the answer is because saying that it's in a leather pouch for her is not a simon muvik, and saying that it's in a leather pouch for him is a simon muvik, because lepel, if it would be by her, it wouldn't have been in a leather pouch. So the fact that he's saying it's in a leather pouch, that's an indication that it was taka by him and it was in his leather pouch. Halacha ches, Motza gets shichr. So you have a shtar that says that the Odin was Meshachar the Eved. The shaila is, did the Odin write it and he didn't yet give it to the Eved, or he already gave it to the Eved and it fell from the Eved, and the Eved is Meshachar. Is Mizman Sharav made the Rav is made that he was already Meshachar the Eved. Is Yazul Eved, because he can Meshachar him now and knows he does Baldin. There's no knunya by saying that he was Meshachar the Eved. However, Ein Rav made if he's claiming that he wasn't yet Meshachar the Eved, so the din is Leyazir Leiz Ever Leilazeh. You don't give it to the Eved Pashut, and you even don't give it to the Odin, because we don't know. Maybe he was Meshachar the Eved, so you don't give back this star to the Odin. Halacha tes Motza Shtar Matana. So the shaila is over here. Did he actually give the Shtar Matana? Did the Noisen give it to the Makabel? Or maybe the Noisen just wrote the Shtar Matana, he never really gave it to the Makabel. So obviously, if the Noisen is not moided that he gave it to the Makabel, you can't give it to the Makabel. The question is, if the Noisen is moided that he gave it to the Makabel, so why should there be a problem of giving it to the Makabel? So on that we say no. That even if the Noisen is moided that he gave it to the Makabel, you can't give it to the Makabel. Why? Because Lepeil, Mashal, he gave a matana, let's say he has a matana dated on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Lepel, it's possible that on Rosh Chodesh Nisan he wrote a star and he never gave the matana. On Rosh Chodesh year, he went ahead and sold this field. He sold this field, which he wrote a star on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which was really his field because he never gave away the star. Now on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, they found the star, and now the Noisna Matana says that I gave this matana already to the Makabel matana on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So it comes out that now the Makabel is going to end up having a star which says that he received the matana Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And Lepel, as a result of that star, he'll be able to be moitzi from the Lekuchas, which bought it in here, and he never bought it. And the reason why we're choishish about the star is because since it was Nafal Isra, so there's a reis in the star. So we assume, normally a person has a star, we assume the Taka received the star. We don't assume that there's all these reises. Mashenkin, over here, you found a star, so there's a reis in the star. So there's a svara to say that it's not a good star. So even though the Noisen is tiny, it was a good star, but we don't believe him because Lepel, through what he's saying, could be he's being mafsid lekuchas, possible lekuchas, which bought between the zman of the star and right now. That's this din of the Nesim Matana. Now, Bamedvar Mamurim, if we're talking about a Matnas Bari, so Matnas Bari, the question is, it'll always be the earlier star will be the real star. So Mele, if this person will have a star matana that he received the matana on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and the Lekeach is going to have a star that he bought this karka on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, so the Makabel matana of Rosh Chodesh Nisan will be able to take it out of the hands of the Lekeach or the Makabel matana of Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Masha'egen, if we're talking about a matan shchivmira is fakert. It always goes according to the later star. The later star is the one you listen, because by Matan Shchivna you could be Chazer. Since the Matan Shchivna is only Chal Achar Misa, so a whole time until the Misa he could be Chazer. So Memela, if it was a Matan Shchivna, so then there's no problem. There's no problem of if he says that it's a good star, if the Noisen says it's a good star, there's no problem. What's the problem? Maybe he wrote another star, and Memela he'll invalidate that star. No, if he wrote another star, that other star is going to be the valid star. Halacha tes. Matzah star matana. If a person finds a star matana, is im matnas bari, it's a matnas bari, which means that through the nesinas hashtar, that's when the kinyan is chal. Is afal pi sheshneyam meidem, even though the beith meidem basically means that the noisin is meidem that he gave it to the makabel, is leyazer, leilazeh, don't give it back to either. Why? Even though the noisin is tiny, it belongs to the makabel, because shema, kosev litin v'leinosin. Maybe he wrote the star, but he never really gave the star. And after he already wrote the star, he went ahead and then he went ahead and sold it or gave it away. Now he has charata from that sale that he sold it to the second person. And so the reason why he's being made that this star was really the star of the Makabel Matana, that he really gave it, wasn't because he really gave it. Because he's interested in taking it out from the person that he gave it to on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, or that he sold it to on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So therefore, the fact that he's saying that he gave it, you don't believe him, because by him saying it, he's being mafsid that potential buyer or recipient of a matana at a later date. That's talking about if the star is a matnas bari. So Memele, if it's dated earlier, so the person that has that earlier star will get it. However, the matnas shchivmira, but if that star that was lost is a matnas shchivmira, if the giver, the person that the person that wrote the star, gave the star, is moida that it's a real star, that he gave it away, is yitin. So then he give it away. But if he's not moida, he claims that he was kosav litin v'leinosan, so then you don't, could be he never gave it, so Memele, it was never chal the star. Why by a shchivmina we're not worried about the fact that maybe there was a psal halva, there was a sale during Iyar, a later sale, and Memele, this is going to cause to invalidate that later sale. The teretz of haker shchivmira shenosun l'shnayim zacher zehachrin kona kameshi is worse. So Memele, by him giving it to Rosh Chodesh Nisan dika person, he's not going to be invalidating the Rosh Chodesh Iyar dika person, because the Rosh Chodesh Iyar taki gets it. The pill, even if Ali B'Damas, he gave it away in Nisan, and then he gave it away in Iyar, so it goes to the person in Iyar, because the Shchivmei has a right to be Chezer Bey. So the kitz of the din is that if you have a matnas bari, so then you're not nema to say that you gave it, because maybe you're being master del kuches, masa'inkin, if you're dealing with a matnas shchivmira, you are nema to say that you gave it, because lepel, over here, you're not mafsid the lekuches, because the lekuches are not going to lose. Fakir, it's going to belong to the lekuches, even though there's an earlier star. Now that's by medvar mamurim if the shchivmer is still alive. So in other words, you're dealing with the Shchiv Mirah. You found a star, the Shchiv Mirah is still alive, and the question is, did the Shchiv Mirah write another star? So we say, even if he did write another star, but the other star is going to be a valid star. But what happens if you're dealing not with the Shchiv Mirah, you're dealing with the Yorshim of the Shchiv Mirah? So you found a star, and there's the star of a Shchiv Mirah, and Lepel now, the question is, did this Shchiv Mirah, now you're dealing with the Yorshim of the Shchiv Mirah. And the Yorshim of the Shchiv Mirah are being moida that the star of the Shchiv Mirah was a good star. So Lepel, if the Yorshim of the Shchiv Mirah gave away that field after the Shchiv Mirah died, after the Shchiv Mirah died, he was already, they gave away that field, so that sale is dependent. In other words, if the Shchiv Mirah actually gave away the Matna Shchiv Mirah, so Mele was Chal right away Lachar Misa, so it comes out that sale that they made is an invalid sale. But if Lepel, it wasn't, he never gave it away, so then their sale is a valid sale. So it's the same idea like a Matnas Bari. Just like a Matnas Bari, his doesn't have an amonis, because could be he's being mafsid the lekuches or the mekabel matana. So the Bnei Ashchiv Mirah also don't have an amonis, because could be they're being mafsid the recipient. Which recipient? The recipient that bought from them. That's the halacha Yud. Mes Shchiv Mirah shenosn matana. A Shchiv Mirah wrote a star b'matana, and he died. Is Afal Pisha Hayerish Meida Shemirishi Nosna. Now the Yerush is the one that's being Meida, that his Meirish actually gave away the star. He actually gave it to the recipient. So the din is Harizel Yaser Leila Zev Leila Zev. Why? Because of the same reason why Matnus Bari, because Shem and Kosev Litan Nosam. Maybe in reality the Shchiv Mirah actually wrote the star, but he never gave away the star. And then Umochra Hayerish Enosna. And now the Yerush was the one, not the Shchiv Mirah was the one. If the Shchiv Mirah was the one, there's Nosna, so then the Shchiv Mirah's Nesina after the first Nesina is a good Nesina, because you always go Basar Achrein. But over here, the Yerush was Machra, a Nosna v'Chazer Bey, and now Vaharehu, this Yerush of the Shchiv Mirah, Reitzelas is Knunim Zekadei Lavkia Nirzi Achrein, said if you don't believe him, because could be Be'emes, it was maybe there was never such a star, and Memele, it never belonged to this person, and memela, so you can't be mafkia from the mekabel of the Yorsh Shchiv Mirah. Mashenken, if it was a real good star, so then they're going to be able to be made from him, because knows when the Shchiv Mirah dies, and then the sale, then the nesina is already finished to whoever the recipient is, and now, just like in a case of Matnas Bari, so you mafsid the lekuches of later. So Alderes by Matnas Shchiv Mirah, Matnas Shchiv Mirah, Lachar Misa is already the final of the sale, and now you mafsid whoever the Yorshim may have given her over or sold it to after the death of their father. Halacha Yudalef. Motzer Shaver, you found a receipt. So, normally if a borrower goes ahead and wants to give the payment to the lender, and the lender, let's say, doesn't have the star, so the lender writes a receipt to the borrower that receipt that he received the money. Now it's possible for the lender to write a receipt and not actually give it to the borrower, because he thought the borrower was going to give him the money, and Lepel, the borrower, never gave him the money. So it was a kosav to give it, and Lepel, he never received the money. So there could be a mitzvah of a shaver where you have a shaver, you're not really sure that it fall from the borrower, and Memela it comes out that the lender already gave the borrower this receipt, or no, it fell from the lender, and the lender wrote a receipt, but he never actually got the money from the borrower, and he never gave it to the borrower. So Motzer Shaver is Bizman Shabal Hashtar Meida Shanish Bashtori Uproi Emochli. So notice the Bal Hashtar, which is the Malva, is Meida, that this shaver was a real shaver. Notice I already got paid for my original star. And Memela, so I wrote a shaver, is Yitnal Bala shaver. So then you give it to the person that the receipt should be his, which is the lender, which is the borrower. However, Einstein made them, if neither of them are made, is Liyazer, Leila Zev, Leila Zeh, because we don't know, is this really something which belongs to the borrower because he already paid it, or does it belong to the lender because it was never paid? Lepel, since the lender has a star and the borrower doesn't have a star, so the lender ends up being able to money from the borrower. And the fact that the borrower has a maybe star, that's not a star. The fact the lender comes along and says, I have a star, you owe me the money. He says they found a shaver that they found and he doesn't have, that's not going to do anything for him. Halacha Yud Beis. Now, Matzah Ksuba. Now, Ksuba is a means for a woman to be able to mon her Ksuba. Is Aval B'Shishneim made them, they're both made that the No, the husband is made that he owes her the ksuba, that he actually owes her the ksuba. So the din is liyazal isha. You still shouldn't give it to the isha. Why? Because shema nifru ksuba zu nimchla. Maybe this ksuba was paid, or she was meichel the ksuba, and v'achar kach mocher abal nechasav, and then the baal sold his nechasim after it was already paid. It was already paid. And memela, really, that nechasim isn't meshubed to her ksuba because it was already paid. So basically, it's the same idea of shtar chayv, like we started off in the beginning of the period. If you have a malva and a leva, the malva is being made that he owes the leva the money. The leva is being made rather that he owes the malva the money. So the question is, does he really owe the money, or really he doesn't owe the money because he already paid the malva? The only reason why he's being made is in order to be heitzim ha'alukuchas. So the same thing over here. The husband is being made that he owes the woman the money. Maybe he doesn't really owe her the money. And the only reason he's being made is in order for her to be able to take out from the lekuchas, and then they'll make a knunya on the lekuchas. The lotion of shema nifru ksuba zu nimchala v'achar kach mocher ba'al nechasav. It sounds like that the chash is only if he sold it after it was nifru a nimchala. Pasha, there's no difference. The ikar point is that lepeil, if he sold his nechasim, and in reality he doesn't owe her the money. He doesn't owe her the money. So memela, when she's gonna go ahead and mon from these nechasim which were sold after the zman hakasa b'ksuba. No, she could only mon from the nechasim after the zman hakasa b'ksuba. So when she goes ahead and mons from these nechasim after the zman hakasa b'ksuba, there's a chash that maybe she doesn't really have a right to, because lepeil, maybe she was nifra a nimchala. And the reason why we're chayshish over here, look, every woman that comes with a ksuba, maybe she was nifra and nimchala, because we're not chayshish. But over here, since it was nafla, so the shtar was nafal, so it's isra, so there's a reis in the shtar. And the question is the shtar really a shtar which you owe the money to? So memela, since there's a reis, and the whole nemonis is coming based on the fact that he's being maida, but since his zaydah is causing a hefsid for the kuchas that bought from him after the zman hakasa b'shtar, so therefore he doesn't have an amonis, and therefore you're not machzer leisha. Halacha yud gimel. Motza igris shum. Igris shum is that if you have someone owes the leva owes the malva money, and the leva is not here to pay, he doesn't have any money to pay, so you go ahead and Bezna assesses certain karka what belongs, and knows the value of what belongs to the malva, and they give it to the malva. That's called the igris shum, the igris of assessing the karka which really which should go to the malva for his payment from the leva. Or the igris mazin, the same thing, that a woman is entitled to get money for food and lepeiled, so you go ahead and you have an igeris to go ahead and sell this piece of land in order to generate money to pay for her food. So that's the igeris, which the shtar of the bezin, which is saying that this karka was assessed for this and this amount of money, and that money and that karka was being sold in order to pay for the food that this woman was supposed to get. That's the igris mozen. Or shtari chalitza. There was a chalitza performed in front of Edom, in front of Bezin, and then lepeil, there's a shtar saying that a chalitza was performed. Or miyunim, again, that there was a miyun performed, and there's a shtar saying that a miyun was performed. Or a shtari tainus. The shtari tainus, a case in the dayanim. The dayanim listen to the tainus from both sides, and also they write a shtar writing clearly what the tainus are in order to be able to paskin based on those tainus. Shekesin had dayanim shel baldin zev shel chaveri, which lechura is pashut. I mean, that's lechura something which just belongs to bezin. A shematz shtari birurim. Shtari birurim means a shtar which each person was mevarer who should be the dayan on his side, and they were kaina from him. V'heim ashtar shebiru lem balidinim es hadayanim shedon olam v'kiblu aleim. They were mekabel upon themselves shedon olam plaini. A shematza kol ma'aseh bezin, any ma'aseh bezin, anything that bezin is something which bezin is instituting, and memela, so this is a shtar that bezin institutes, and bezin writes a shtar in order as a raya that they instituted this and this inyan. So all these dinim is ariza yavzer, because there's no such a chash. In other words, normally there's a chash. If there's two people, the shaila is who does it belong to? You have a shaila, a malva and a leva, who does it belong to? And then even if the malva is made them, maybe his eidah is going to be mafsed someone. But over here, it's not shaykhas that there should be a shaila, who does it belong to? And also, there's no kshash that someone is going to be made and be mafsed someone. There's no hefsed that could come as a result of these shtaris. So if you have a star of Bezin, which is an Igris Shum or Igris Mozen, or Shtari Chalitza Me'un, and a Shtari Tainus, which the Dayanim write, or Shtari Birurim, so these are shtaris which you always give back to whoever the pashtus of the dvarim this belongs to, the person that's supposed to be holding this star. Kloli shel davar, kol star, shechoishen lebi piroin, if there's a chash that maybe this star was paid up, is layazu, you can't pay it, give it back, because shemani rachev, so you can't go give the star to the person that's the collector of the star, because maybe it was paid. Vim hoya chayev meida, and if the person that the star seems to be saying owes the money is meida, and ve'ev sheheda kedei lasis knunya at sheyavsis halikechim mekabel hamatona shalokhu acher zman hashtar kedei sheyifru miyodim shleikedin, and there's a concern that maybe this heidah was only used in order as a knunya, in order to be able to take the karka out of this person shleikedin. So then it's a rezil yazer afal b'shishneim meidem, and v'chol shtar she'em beitzad l'kshash loy lepiroin v'loy l'knunya. But if there's a kshash that there's no kshash, there was no piroin, there was no knunya, it's a regular shtaris. Like these shtaris of Igris Shum and Igris Mozen, Igris Chalitza, Miyunin, etc. So Memela is Yachzer L'Ba'olof. Halacha Yudalit. Kol HaShtaris Hanimtzoim Shedinam Shalei Yachzer, which the din is that you're not supposed to return it. Lepeil Im Hirzer Harei L'Ksherim. Because Leyachzer doesn't mean that they're apostle shtar. It means that the people that are involved and they found the star, we don't really know that this star should be returned. So therefore, it's a leyazir. Masha'enken, if lepel they were machzer, so then as harei l'ksherim, the star is kosher, and they gave him behem. Ve'im mitziyin esim mitachas yad baleim, bareim becheskoson, ve'im chesh lehem. From Pashas Lashon Rambam, it sounds like that even if lepel there was a matzav where you said leyazir, and lepel you were hirzir, you also, that's the Lashon Rambam, even though dinam shel yazer, but lepelim hirzer is harei l'ksherim, we gave him even after the din was paskin leyazer. Lepel, the Rambam brings from the Gemara in Bava Metzia, and based on also dinam that it says in other places that this din is only if it was hirzer before we established leyazer. Because once there was established a din that leyazer, so the hirzer is not going to change anything. If it was leyazer, if lepel we were machzer, then we're saying, well, l'chura that now Bezin is paskin leyachzer, so we say, but since he was already hirzer and lepel is becheskes, so even if we know that be'emes, if we would have gone to Bezin would have said leyachzer, but lepel since he was machzer, so it's becheskase. Mashenkin, once Bezin paskin is leyachzer, so the fact that hirzer is not going to change that din, and memeli you're not going to be able to mon from such a star. If you give a star to the malva. And really, you shouldn't give the star to the malva, because lepel is a chash, maybe yasek knunyan al lekuches. So the din is, if you gave the star to the malva before there was established that you leyachzer, so lepel right now, since the malva has that star, so you could mon the star even from lekuches. But if there was already a matzav where bezin paskin leyachzer, and now lepel, the person didn't listen and he gave it to the malva, so from deswegen the malva is not able to mon from the lekuches. Slikulu hilchas Gzeilah V'Aveidah b'siyata d'shmaya.